Hello, it's Jennifer McGuire for Hero Arts. Thanks for stopping by. Today I have a unique technique that is a great way to stretch your stamp and get more from it. I actually took a stamp that looks completely different, and with some creative masking and also with some color on dark cardstock you get a completely different look. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm using this greeting from the Enjoy Today stamp set, and I need to mask off a diagonal area for the greeting. So I'm using some painter's tape. Now my painter's tape was just not wide enough for this greeting, so I'm actually going to layer two pieces on top of each other, just slightly offset to make it wider, and so that's perfect for that greeting. So now that I have masked off this area, I'm going to do my stamping. Now I'm using one of the new Hero Arts flower stamps. I love this stamp. It would be perfect for watercolor and subtle, nice images on white cardstock, but I wanted to give it a completely different look. Now I'm putting a piece of scrap paper here on the bottom to mask that off also. Now I am going to stamp with black dye ink on the black cardstock. And I'll stamp so the flowers look like they're coming out from the masked area that we've created. Now you'll see that this black image is very, very subtle on here. The reason I'm doing this is I'm going to trace over it with colored pencil. So I can barely see it, but I see it enough to be able to trace over it. And it'll look like I hand drew all those flowers on the dark cardstock. So now that I've done the top area, I'm going to go ahead and flip it over, get my mask in place, and do some stamping so it looks like the flowers are coming from the bottom of the masked area also. Now you can barely see the stamping that I have here, but I'll tilt it in the light and it's enough to be able to trace it. So don't worry if it's too subtle because we want to cover up that black ink anyways. So now I'm going to go ahead and add some color onto this, but I want to mask that area back off. I got ink all over my last mask, so I wanted a clean piece here so that I don't smear it around. I'm taking colored pencils and starting with my lightest color and just coloring over each of the stamped flowers. Now here I'm using a light pink, and then I'm going to go in with a darker shade of pink to add some depth to it, and then an even darker shade over that. Now the reason I start with the light is it kind of puts a foundation of lightness, I don't know if that's the right word there, but a light foundation on this dark cardstock to add the color. Now this is going to be very subtle. It's kind of like this subtle bit of color that has a little bit of a glow to it, but I think it's really nice, and I think it's something that's very unique. So now that I have this flower done, I'm going to go ahead and move on to another one. This time I'm doing some shades of purple. Now when I did this, I liked that it was very subtle, but it almost looked a little bit too washed out. So here's the trick to making it pop. I go in with a white colored pencil and kind of do an outline around it, not a complete outline, but just kind of some sketchy outline around it, and that's all you need to do to make this pop. Now I am putting this colored pencil down very heavily. The more you more color you put on here with your pencils, the more intense the color will be. I'm using Spectrum Noir colored pencils. I really like them. They're nice quality. I also like Prismacolor, but you can use any color pencils that you might already have. Using the white colored pencil really makes a big difference to make this pop. Now, if you wanted more intense color than you're getting with this technique here, you could first stamp your flowers with a white pigment ink. Then heat set it so it completely dries, and then add color on top of that. By having the white pigment ink down first, you will end up with more intense color on top of it. But I was kind of going for a more subtle image here. I did show a video recently on Hero Arts, which we'll add a link to in the blog post, where I stamped with white on craft and then added color on top of it. And that's a similar technique. But I liked starting with the black base here just enough to trace it, because this completely looks like these were hand-drawn colored pencils. Now I felt like I needed some leaves on here, so I'm just hand drawing some leaves kind of sticking out here and there with some greens, and then I go in and add the highlights with my white pencil. Now this isn't perfect. I'm not making these blend perfectly. I'm kind of leaving them sketchy looking, but I think that's part of the feel of this technique. Now I'm going ahead and adding the color to the flowers below the masked area, doing the same thing. Now we have all of our coloring done here. I'm going to go ahead and gently remove the mask here. If you pull this kind of slowly, usually that painter's tape comes off without having to worry about damaging your paper. I'm using a T-ruler here to do a white line right along the edges of where our mask used to be, and I'm just using a white pencil here. If you go back and forth, it makes it nice and intense. If you really want an intense white line, you could use a white pen. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same here. And it looks like we have these cute little flowers just kind of popping up below and above our masked off area. Completely different look than what this stamp was originally intended to look like. Now it's time to do some white heat embossing in the center. On black cardstock, I always use my anti-static powder tool first. You'll see the powder, but don't worry, we'll remove it later. I'm going to stamp this with Versamark ink and add some white embossing powder. Now this white embossing powder is going to want to stick everywhere. That's why we want to make sure we use some sort of anti-static tool first. So I've added my white powder and I'm going to go ahead and heat set this. Now this white is going to be much more intense than the rest of the coloring on here, but I wanted that because then it makes that greeting stand out even more. To remove that anti-static powder, I just take a baby wipe that's not so wet and quickly wipe across it, and it removes it and you'll never see it again. I decided I wanted some little white dots kind of scattered around the card. Now with a white pencil, if it's not too sharp and you really want to put the pencil down very heavily, it's hard to get a nice round dot. This is my trick for doing it. I put the pencil onto my paper, hold it there firmly, and spin the paper around. And this results in the perfect little dot of white. I had tried doing this with a white pen, but it was a little too intense compared to the coloring that we did, so the pencil works perfectly. So now that we have our panel done here, I'm going to go ahead and put some foam tape behind it, and then I'm going to add it onto a snow note card. The way I add a piece like this against the edge is just to hold it up against my table, and that way I know that it's lined up on the edge, and there we have our card. So this is a great technique for getting a completely different look from a stamp, and a great way to stretch products you probably already have, including colored pencils. If you're interested in these products or the techniques and you want to learn more, please head over to the Hero Arts blog. Thanks so much for stopping by.